Conversation. So, welcome. I'm here today with Jay Gunkelman. Very honored to have you here on this podcast conversation today. Jay Gunkelman is involved in applied psychophysiology and biofeedback since the 1972, and he has worked with pretty much everybody in his field. Has looked at over 500,000 brains and brain waves and EEGs and whatnot. He has written several scientific papers, has done many presentations, books, has the greatest depth of understanding in this field. And he has worked with hardcore neuroscience and all the way to the other spectrum in consciousness research of EEG, studies of healers. Very interesting to me. So, thank you so much, Jay, for being here today. And I'm very excited to learn a little bit more from you. There are some things that I know about the field of applied neuroscience. I'm a student of it, and I've been dabbling in it for the past few years, maybe what 2020, maybe 3 years. I have 3 years. I'm a baby. But I'm really fell in love with it because of the potential that it has to really help people fast. So, um, what I would like to do is for you to explain a little bit how you got started. What is psychophysiology, right?
It's both sides of the coin at the same time.
Mm,
you know, People have historically viewed the mind and the body as like two separate entities, and
mm,
the psychology and the physiology were separate fields. And unfortunately, that separation hasn't served us well. It probably goes back to Descartes, the you know the but it was his mistake. We don't have to keep repeating it. Um, Anything that affects the body affects the mind.
mm,
Anything that affects the mind affects the body. Psychophysiology ends up identifying the fact that they're linked. Uh, uh, um, and think about it. Bessel van der Kolk's book, "The Body Keeps the Score." If you've had psychological trauma, it
mm,
isn't necessarily that you were beaten. Maybe you were, maybe you weren't in your trauma, but the trauma, the fact that you were traumatized, is stored in the body, and it's not we're not disembodied brains. A lot of the neurofeedback world kind of treats the head as though it's it. But it's important, but it's not the only piece of us. And if you start to disassociate it from the body, you've made a mistake, because the body keeps interacting with the brain. The brain and the heart have coherent patterns that they establish interacting. The brain affects the heart affects the brain. And more recently, they've started to say, well, the gut biome affects the brain.
mm,
Well, very recently they identified that the brain changes the gut biome. So we're we're a gigantic, very complex set of feedback loops. Feedback is how things self-regulate. If how do you know how to eat? Well, you learned feedback. The first time you might have thrown the food over your shoulder, the next time you might have gotten on your forehead, but eventually you find, how to make the body work, and feedback is how that works. And once we learn how to understand the physical body, and take that to a logical extreme, like jujitsu, or
mm,
an elite athlete of some sort. You master some systems in the body, but there are other systems up there that end up being key to being the best at any sport. The the fine tuning in sports is mental. It's not
Mhm.
all what you can lift. All the workout stuff is important. You don't get to the end point without the work, but you also have to have your head straight about it, because it just one little bit of self doubt, or the things, uh, as they say, the other team got in your head. Well, if if that's the case, you're not playing your mental game well yet. All the workouts fine, and I've worked with elite athletes that were extremely labile in their performance. Sometimes they were really great, and sometimes they were just terrible. And the coach really couldn't figure it out.
Mm,
And we looked at the EEG, and we found the frontal cingulate. The anterior cingulate helps
mm,
with motivation and initiation. And when he was motivated,
mhm.
he was on. When he wasn't motivated, he could care about the game. So his performance, well, you can imagine a performance when you didn't care about your performance. It's going to be just like that. It's not going to be a good performance. So you have to have your head in the game. And luckily, uh, uh, um, neurofeedback can help people get their head in the game. This tennis player was ranked 1,000 something. And I don't know tennis rankings, but that doesn't sound very good to me. you know, probably not really a star at that point. And he ended up like number 50 something, in tennis ranking. And moving that much wasn't him learning how to hold the racket. This was getting his head in the game. So
Amazing. Yeah,
yeah,
so all of these are examples of the mind body connection, right? It's, I mean, the you can train all you want, right? You can be physically a specimen, you can put in all the hours, but if your mind is not in the right place, if your brain waves are a little out of whack, they're not uh,
yeah,
right, calm, relaxed, or focused, what can happen is you can boycott, you can sabotage your own success, right? We
yeah,
see that. I see that in the gym sometimes. There's people that are great at the gym. Like they, like just in training, they beat up everybody. Comes to the tournament, they cannot perform. It's that stage fright kind of thing, right? So there are ways to correct that. So just to backtrack a little bit, so psychophysiology, right? So that's what Jay Gunkelman is an expert in. That's what he went to school for. That's what I'm going to school for. It's kind of like a smaller field within what, psychology, or what would you say, maybe biology, or
yeah.
different
It's
sciences.
actually it's where psychology and psychiatry are headed.
Mm,
They've historically been oriented towards the diagnosis.
right.
What's your diagnosis? As though that's something important. If the diagnosis predicted therapy efficiently
Mhm.
or at all, it would be a good thing. The intention is diagnosis, therefore therapy.
Right.
If we diagnose you, that will tell us how to treat you. Unfortunately, that's just not how it works. It's a highly reliable system. It get the same diagnosis again and again and again if you have the same symptom presentation. The thing is, it doesn't tell anybody how to treat you. Just because you have depression doesn't mean they have one medication or another or another. They have an entire class, and you might not respond to anything in the depressant class. You might take a stimulant of some sort, or an anticonvulsant of some sort. It
Mm.
depends upon what your brain needs. And unfortunately, our symptoms don't tell us what our brain needs.
Mhm.
Psychology has forever practiced this. I listen to your story and I come up with a diagnosis. Now, if medicine practiced that way, if you were a cardiologist and I came into your office, oh, doc, I got this chest pain. Oh, well, go get an angioplasty. Well, half the people you just sent for an angioplasty had indigestion. The symptom should tell you what to test to find out what's the pathophysiology. It doesn't tell you how to treat. Chest pain could be an angioplasty to fix a heart problem, but it could be indigestion, in which case that's a wasted surgery. And you don't want to go through surgical risk unless you have to. So, uh, uh, and one thing about psychophysiology or understanding the brain, we can never master it.
Hmm.
We're on a never ending learning curve. We're all students. There is nobody on the top. We're all climbing. If you think about it, how can a mind inside of you hold within itself an understanding of a mind? I mean, the problem is insolvable if you're just one person's mind. If you link yourself in a network of individuals that all have a piece of the puzzle, that network can hold inside the network a full understanding of the mind and the brain and all of this. So don't believe anybody who says they know it. If they're studying it, that's the best thing to do because you can't you can't ever totally master it. You can get better and better and better at it. But believe me, I know a lot of really famous neuroscience folks. They know one part of the neuroscience really, really, really well. And
Hmm.
if you ask them about something next door to the silo that they're in, they know something about it, but they don't really have the depth. And I've dabbled in a lot of different silos over the years, so I can tell fairly quickly whether somebody knows a lot or if they know one thing really well. And I honor the ones who know one thing very well. They're
Hmm.
the ones you need to hook up with. But the generalist who knows a bit of everything is also useful. Yeah, it's good to have a broad knowledge as well.
Yeah,
And
it's nice to have a generalist that can at least point you to the right expert. Say, okay, I can see you're within, the realm of this concern, so I'm gonna send you to this specialist, so that we're not trying to solve all the problems ourselves. Another thing I kind of encounter in academia or even in different modalities in the healing arts is people sometimes they use the word mind and brain interchangeably, and I even like well-renowned people in certain books and certain things, and that always kind of like makes me think like, wow, like it's a very different. The brain is the brain, and the mind it's completely different. So could you please maybe clarify what's the difference between the brain and the mind, or how they interact, what they are similar and where they're different?
well, I like to keep the concept of mind around
Mm,
because there's parts of brain function that we would point to as likely being the mind. Most
mm,
of those are covert. You can tell that's the brain moving things. There you
mm,
can there's some things that is definitely a particular spot in the brain that does a particular thing. But
physical, right?
there's aspects of the brain that are not just that one spot. The brain has neurology in it, but it also has glia, the the other brain. There's a book about white matter called The Other Brain.
Mm,
And white matter is not neurology's neurons. It's the insulation that wraps the neurons
the fat.
and speeds them up.
Mm,
And oddly enough, the infralow frequencies, the very, very slow frequencies in the brain,
mm,
infraslow, infralow, or slow cortical potentials all refer to this below a half a cycle or below 1 cycle a second. Very slow activity. Most
mhm,
people filter out the slow activity to look at the EEG in
Right.
the United States. In
Mm.
Europe, historically, they filtered out the oscillating stuff and looked at the slow cortical potentials. So Burbaumer in the 1960s and 70s was teaching people how to not have a seizure by teaching them to control their glia, the slow cortical potentials. Now,
Wow.
he misattributed it to, thalamicortical systems. He actually thought it was still, neurological neurons doing it. But in fact, the slow potentials they were training were glia. And glia have things that are like intention. Intention? Well, that's not like this spot or that spot or some spot. Intention is intention. It's not action, it's intention. And if I'm looking at your brain, I can tell when you're intending to move,
Wow.
even if there's no movement. And I can tell when you quit intending, and you might not have moved, So you're sitting there still, you intend to move, and then you quit intending. I could tell when you intended and when you quit intending by looking at the slow cortical potentials in the frontal area, the premotor area that plans and executes motor function. As you get ready to do something, it's a gigantic German word. I'm German. I can make fun of the Germans making big words.
Mhm.
Bereitschaftspotential. The word potential is still part of the same word. Bereitschaftspotential. So one gigantic word. It's a slow process that goes electronegative in the frontal lobes before you actually move. It's the preparation or readiness. It's the intention to move. And if you're sitting there measuring the person, you can tell whether they're paying attention to or moving their foot or their hand or their face. It's the foot on the top, the hand about halfway down, and the face kind of on the side. Now, on both sides, other side of your body. But if you pay attention to or intend to move those parts, the brain lights up in either the motor or sensory areas appropriate to those parts. The intention to move is intention, but attention is the intention to perceive. The same electronegative that we see up front happens in sensory areas. I can look directly at you and pay only attention to where you are with my eyes. I just focus my eyes right on you, but I'm paying attention to everything on that side of the room. So, although my focus is on you, the left side of everything I'm paying attention to shows up on the right side of the back of my head. That will light up electronegative, not because it's what I'm focusing on, but it's what I'm intending to perceive. And it drops the threshold for perception. So I can perceive things on that side more readily. And although I might keep my focus right on you, it could be attending over there. And you shape your perception. We sculpt our perception. We create our perception.
Oh, I love this subject. All about
So
perception.
and
Mhm.
so visual perception, tactile perception.
Mhm.
Again, you can tell where somebody's focusing their attention, which is again the intention to perceive.
Mhm.
And you know, uh, those are all slow cortical potentials, and they're in the realm. I would say those intention, attention,
Mhm.
motivation. Those are like the mind. That's not just a spot in the brain. That's
Mhm.
the mind, and the mind isn't just here. You've got an acupuncture system,
Right.
and it doesn't run on neurons.
Runs an
It
energy.
doesn't. It doesn't go to the surface on a neuron and follow a neuron up to the brain. The acupuncture system is its own system,
It's an
and
intelligent system, right?
yes, it is. It's a well developed. It's a DC system instead
Mhm.
of. It's like direct current potentials,
Mhm.
and the little acupuncture point on the tip of your finger is a little tiny dot. if you have the right measurement, a DC null detector or microvolt meter, the really small point on it, and you measure that spot, if you move a couple millimeters away, you lose hundreds of microvolts of power. So just a little bit of a movement, and you suddenly change how intense that spot is. Just a spot. It's not a whole piece, and that system is very well described. It goes through your brain, through your body. It's a system that's not nearly as well studied. The acupuncture people work with that system somewhat. Uh, uh, they realize neurons and all of that as well, but the acupuncture system is more related to the acupuncture and the meridians and points that you see. And
Yes.
if you measure them, they're electronegative.
Mm,
If you're feeling things,
mm,
if you numb the hand, whether you do it from hypnosis or a nerve blockade or unconsciousness. However, I'm not feeling that hand. You can predict I'm not going to feel it by measuring those acupuncture points. If those electronegative points drop electropositive or drop down to almost nothing, there's no sensation.
mm.
You can turn off sensation.
Right.
And, one of my first patients in the laboratory in 1972 was a young girl who was severely depressed. And we brought her in, and like everybody, we tested everything. We did a big profile. Every piece of equipment we had, we would hook up just to see what you had going. There
Yeah.
was nobody who could tell us what was we were going to see. This is 1972. There wasn't any, you know, knowledge about what physiological profiles looked like. So we were examining people, and we would find a system that was off, and we could train it. And for her, she was severely depressed. We hooked up her EMG, the forearm EMG, one of the most voluntary muscles in the body. It moves your fingers. If you don't know what you're doing with your fingers, you're worse off than anybody. I mean, that it's a very voluntary movement.
Mhm.
So once in a while, I have some involuntary things I do with my fingers, but that's another story. Uh, uh, so you hook up the forearm extensors, and you know, she was going like 300 microvolts down to 2, and then 300 and down to 2. And you
Mm,
got to pretty much do this, tense, relax, tense, relax, tense, relax. And
mm,
she wasn't moving. So at first, and I said, "Can you feel that?" And she said, "No, I can't feel anything." So I thought, well, maybe the equipment is bad. So I swapped it out for another meter, and it was the same thing.
mm,
And so you could say, well, she's lying, or you can believe her. And she said she couldn't feel it. And I'm thinking, well, if you've got a way to not feel something, it's probably very useful. It's if we could figure out how you do it. So at the time, I had cut off those 4 fingers and had them put back on. And do you know what they feel like? Minus 40 degrees in North Dakota with
yeah,
fingers that have been reattached. It feels kind of like you put your hand in a vise and you're turning it tighter and tighter and tighter. It really, really hurts.
yeah,
And I'm thinking, she's got something I want. I would
mm,
like to be able to turn off this hand so I don't feel that,
mm,
severed and reattached fingers.
mhm,
And I'd like to warm up that hand because minus 40 degrees is minus 40 degrees. And if your circulation's been goofed up, the tips of those fingers get mighty cold mighty fast. So temperature training was a routine thing in neurofeedback or in biofeedback back then. And I learned how to warm up my hands really well. And that's all nice and warm, but they still hurt like hell. So I wanted to learn how to turn them off. And I studied what was going on with her. And we saw that her acupuncture system, the meridians and hot spots were electropositive, not electronegative. So I used the EEG machine we had, which went from DC to 100 hertz, and I used it at the DC end and amplified the slow cortical potentials,
Mm.
and trained myself to turn off the acupuncture points so that I could turn off sensation.
Wow.
Now, and that, yeah, nice trick, but
Mhm.
was useful for me.
Right.
Years later, David Trudeau, who started the Journal of Neurotherapy many years ago,
Mm.
uh, he came up to me at a meeting and he said, Jay, I heard that you had learned how to like turn off your pain and you know and I you can tell when somebody wants to know if it's true. As is this story I heard about you true? So and you're standing in a meeting, and in a scientific meeting, how are you going to prove, you know well, there's a bucket of ice water with sodas in it right next to me. Cold pressure test. Stick your hand in a bunch of ice water. So I stuck my hand up to my elbow. I just stood next to this bucket of ice water full of sodas with my arm in the ice water for maybe 5 minutes while we were talking. And finally, David said, "Well, it's okay. You can take your arm out now. I can tell where you're not in distress. You're not feeling any." And cold pressure test is enough to get a lot of people to pull their hand out pretty quick. It's not a pleasant feeling, but if you can turn off the feeling, it's just like having your arm in warm air somewhere. There's no difference. There's no input from it. You can turn it off. So he
Uh-huh.
realized, yeah, I
Yeah,
was
you get
literally turning it off. So,
it.
but
Yeah, so there's so much that we can do, right, with our mind, with feedback and that we.
and it is a trick with the mind that turns off the sensation.
Oh, see, it's not like the
It's
brain, it's the.
remember, intention to
Mm-hmm.
move and attention. If you take away all of your attention
Mm-hmm.
to sensation,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have sensation.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Kawakami is a Kundalini expert. I think at the time he was like 75 years old, and he was massive. I mean, he was a physical uh, bodybuilder, martial artist, and Kundalini yoga was his thing. But
Mm-hmm.
he had learned, and he had competed and whatnot. But he could demonstrate the lack of pain, and he would take a barbecue skewer, just not sharp, just like he would poke it through some meat. It's pointed, but it's not sharpened. And he would take folds of skin, which you can't see, uh, uh, but two folds of skin,
Mm-hmm.
it makes four holes, in, out, in, out. And so he'd stick the skewer through his neck, and he'd stick a skewer through his tongue. And he's sitting on stage in Belgium with
Mm-hmm.
an audience, and all of his physiology is being projected on the wall behind him. His
Right.
muscle tension, his heart rate, his electrodermal, his EEG, EMG, everything is being projected on the wall. Thought Technology had their system all set up, so they were showing everything they could. And I was there only to tell them where to put the electrode to show where he would turn off his sensation, because I had seen it already done when he did it in San Francisco, and they did a full QEG. Now they only had one electrode site to demo it with, so I was there to kind of point where it was supposed to be. And he would go from electronegative to electropositive, turn off sensation, do the stick. Once you've got it stuck through, you can turn back on sensation. If you've ever had an IV being stuck, you can feel it. But once it's in there, it's just kind of an annoyance. It's not really that sharp pain of being stuck. So the media had come to Belgium, and they ahead of time they examined him to make sure he hadn't already pierced his tongue or some damn thing. So he stuck his tongue out, wagged his tongue at the camera, and showed his neck didn't have any pre-pierced spots or anything. He This is something he does casually every weekend as a as a trick. This is something he can do, and he will do it as a major demonstration on rare occasion. But he's not a fakir from India that does walking on glass or chewing glass or something as a trick. That this is him demonstrating the intense level of self-control that he and his disciples can do. Now, it was odd enough. I was introduced to him as the person who figured out how he did it. So he bows deep to me. I get self-conscious. I hate that. And so I was avoiding him, but he would find me. There's no way to avoid, somebody who's trying to find you at a meeting. I'd be way across the room, and he would see me. And I'd catch him out of the corner of my eye, and he'd do another bow. And so they did a big tea ceremony, and there's people crowded around. They're whisking the tea, and they have little sugar things, and there's a tea ceremony, and they hand him the first cup, which he could have handed. There were people standing all over. He walked all the way through the crowd to me. I got the first cup of tea. Again, I don't like to be self-conscious, but it got me very self-conscious. And so when I was young, my sisters used to say that they would tease me. I have 4 younger sisters, and that they would say, "Jay, you're blushing." No, I wasn't, but they would just say, "Jay, you're blushing," which would make me blush. So anyway, so I hate being self-conscious. It reminds me of being pestered by my younger sisters and self-consciousness. So I avoid that best I can.
So
Anyway, it's interesting to see the mind control the body, and they interact. The brain's neurology, the neurons are regulated by the glia. The slow cortical potential goes electronegative. The brain is very active. It goes electropositive. It quiets the brain. So there are people that train infralow, infraslow, and they're literally turning on or off areas of the brain, modulating the level of activation using the slow cortical potentials. That's a simple system, is the glia. And using that, you can control, as Dirk de Ritter showed with the infralow, infraslow training. It not only changes the infralow frequency, but also changes all the fast frequencies, which are nested in the low frequencies. The brain has all sorts of frequencies across the frequency spectrum that interact. It's not just one. They used to think, oh, it's alpha. It's meditation is alpha, and so they would train alpha up, as though you're in a sound studio and you can grab an equalizer band and slip one of them up. And you can't just change alpha. It's a system.
right.
You're going to change one thing, it changes everything. So the simplistic idea of the linear model of how the brain worked, like a sound studio's equalizer, there's delta, there's theta, there's alpha, there are different slide switches. They interact, and quite often the theta and the beta end up having a coupling where the phase of the low frequency oscillates the fast frequency, so it modulates it. And when the slow frequency is electronegative, the fast frequency is on. When it goes electropositive, it turns off. And they demonstrate that with frequencies way higher than anything that's usually used. Medically, people stop at about 70 hertz, but gamma 2 is 80 to 100, ripples is up 120, 150. They're faster frequencies. And when you actually look at those faster frequencies, they're turned on and off by slower frequencies. The slower frequencies are carrier waves. The faster frequencies are content. Dirk Ritter's got some very nice talks that are well-grounded scientific talks about this.
Yeah, so I don't think that people have a clear understanding that the brain is electrical, right?
Yep.
When we do EEGs, we're talking about the electrical current in the brain. So we're investigating that. When people think of disorders and things, people have taken medication, and they're thinking about in terms of the brain chemistry. Brain chemistry has been the common
Yeah.
denominator here for treatments for a long time. So to think in terms of like the brain being electrical, it's kind of a new concept to a lot of people. So that's
Yep.
kind of like where we're at. and
Well,
and then when we are studying that electricity coming out of the neuron, there's so much there that we can actually alter just through technology, right?
yeah.
And change the system, change the brain.
Yeah, and we end up having a complex system, but it ends up having fairly straightforward rules on how it operates. And
Hmm.
um, uh, every neuron has two control levers to grab that you can control it. Now
Hmm.
they're not levers,
Right.
but you think like a bulldozer operator.
Hmm.
You got two levers you can work. And one of them is ligand gated ion channels. So this
Hmm.
are medications. This
Chemistry.
is where a medication can lock on and
Hmm.
change how this neuron works. But the
Hmm.
same neuron also has a voltage gated ion channel that operates with voltages. So magnetic and electrical and these, the
Hmm.
acupuncture system. Yeah, the electrical system can operate. So you can train somebody to change how their brain is working electrically and change how it operates. And you're grabbing onto a control mechanism that can regulate things. Now, the old view of the brain basically having a serotonin deficit, and that's what depression is. Well, I'm sorry, but there's no shortage of serotonin in somebody who's depressed. I mean, it's that's not how it works. Now,
Hmm.
serotonin for some people who have depression ends up being of some benefit, but it's not for all of them. And for some of them, it's a mistake. Depression
Hmm.
isn't excess alpha, it's not serotonin, it's actually a behavioral observation. It's again like a DSM category. But when you are told you have chest pain, you got to go looking for what's wrong with the heart. When you say that I'm depressed or I'm anxious or I'm afraid or whatever the mental condition is, we have to look to see what's actually going on. Depression can be an imbalance frontally between left frontal and right frontal as to who's dominant. If you have left frontal alpha, it's idling on the left. If you have right frontal beta, it's active on the right. They're going to look the same. It's an imbalance. So is it more active on the right or less active on the left? They're going to look the same. They're going to look depressed. Now some of them have it at the midline and they have lack of motivation, lack of initiation, and that's what they call depression. It's not mood, it's motivation. And that could be a cingulate issue, the anterior midline. So the fact that you're classified as depressed doesn't suddenly, oh well, there's the medication for you. you know, it unfortunately the DSM diagnosis doesn't predict what you need for therapy. It it should tell them what organ to test. But psychiatry is notoriously lacking in their inquisitiveness about brain activity. They're, they listen to your story, make a guess as to what your diagnosis is, and give you a drug they think might work. If that one doesn't work, they'll give you another one. If that doesn't work, they'll give you another one. You might have side effects. They might be withdrawal, it might be good, might be bad, but that's their system. And their system doesn't have predictive validity. What they come with as a diagnosis predicts nothing
Right.
other than your billing. It effectively will predict what you're being billed, but it won't change the treatment. And if you actually look at how the brain is operating, you can see what it needs. We have some people that come in complaining of depression, and you look and they have no real voltage and they have a thyroid problem.
Mm.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's an easy fix, but it's not taking serotonin. This is thyroid, you know?
You can create
There
more problems on top of the original problem by
Yeah,
taking the wrong thing, right?
yeah.
Hmm.
My grandmother told me, "Don't dive into the water unless you know what's under the surface."
Right.
And it's not just swimming, you know? I mean, why would you treat the brain if you haven't looked to see how it's operating?
Yeah.
Well, if you just listen to the story, you've never examined the brain's operation. You make guesses based on what the story is, but you know, the best storyteller that tells you exactly what's going on with them, you may, as a very good neuroscientist, guess what network in the brain might not be working,
Mm.
but you won't know how it's not working. OCD. How many kinds of OCD are there in the DSM? It's one of the only things that hasn't multiplied to 10 subtypes, you know?
Mm.
Um, there's only one kind of OCD. Well, that's interesting. We see three totally separate kinds,
Right.
and we predict medication
Mm.
or treatment
Mhm.
effectively. If you have OCD as a symptom, your doctor will probably give you fluvoxamine, Luvox, an SSRI, because that's the biggest subgroup. So that's their best guess. And it works sometimes. But if you've got a different pattern, you might have a really bad response or a lack of response. There's a slow pattern. It doesn't respond to the SSRIs, but you don't get a bad response. It's just a waste of time and money, but you
Mhm.
don't get sick from it. You don't have bad side effects. It's just, you're taking a pill you don't need. Yeah, it's a waste of time and money. If you have alpha below 10 hertz, probably have a positive response. In fact, if you look at SSRIs in general in the literature, their response rate, what percent of the time do they actually work?
Mhm.
Well, they barely beat placebo. Placebo's about 35% of the time. They hit 40 plus percent. Well, that's a if you give me 40% odds, I don't go running to Vegas, I'd throw away a whole bunch of money,
Yeah.
Um, you got to have better odds than that. And if you actually look and before you treat, you'll know. If there's a beta subtype, that SSRI will make them a lot worse. And you'll know before they took it that it was a mistake if you look at the EEG. So when you can tell a doctor that they can avoid making a mistake, who's happy?
Mm.
Well, the hospital the doctor works at is extremely happy because when you either get a failed treatment or a bad side effect, people litigate. This is America. They sue you for everything, you know. And if you can avoid side effects and pick the right med first time with looking at something quickly, and it doesn't take much to look at the EEG. It's a 20-minute test if it's done to standard at a bare minimum, and it's non-invasive. You don't
Mm.
have to have injections, and it's not doing something to you. It's measuring you. It's no more invasive than a stethoscope. It probably about equal a cold stethoscope, versus gooey gel. A little inconvenient, but it's not a bad deal. So, and nowadays there's dry sensor electrodes
Yeah.
replacing. They're getting to the point of them in the right circumstances being able to be done clinically. But historically, dry sensors weren't able to give clinical outcomes because they it's just too much artifact, and it requires specialized artifact controls in order to use it.
So, Jay, you've been in this field looking at brains and at electroencephalographs for over 50 years, like easy to say, right? And when you first started studying it, science had been only so far, right? And
Kamiya and Sturman and Burbaumer. Those three are the only real uh, people's work I could stand on at that time. and
And
there wasn't any proven treatments for anything. So
and you're studying the stuff in school, and what has changed, right, in terms of what you've learned, right? What are the main uh, discoveries that have happened, or that changed our understanding in neuroscience by the time you started in the 70s, which a lot of doctors still operating that way with that kind of knowledge, right? If you don't
yeah.
continue to study and read the latest studies, you're not going to know what's new. So what do we know now that we didn't know then in terms of brain science?
Well, the efficacy proofs that are out there are actually fairly solid at this point.
Hmm.
There's good evidence for ADD, ADHD. There's good
Hmm.
evidence for affective regulatory problems. There's extremely good evidence that we can treat uncontrollable epilepsy
Hmm.
and intractable epilepsy being effectively treated so that they're not on medications and they're not having seizures. And I have to say that if you're a person who has uncontrolled epilepsy, the likelihood that your doctor has mentioned neurofeedback to you is about zero.
Wow. Right.
They just don't know about it.
Hmm.
If they've heard about it, they remember it from the 70s. They think us a bunch of
Right.
hippies. Now,
Exactly.
I have to apologize for that reputation. I was a hippie in the 70s, and I had a ponytail I could sit on, and
Hmm.
I was in those early Biofeedback Research Society before it was Biofeedback Society of America, and then Biofeedback Society of America became APB. That uh, uh, I was in the meetings back in the 60s.
Wow.
So anyway, we basically have a depth of knowledge now
Hmm.
that gives us insight into brain function if we look at brain activity. And in psychiatry and psychology, the professional societies have shrunk. Historically, this American Psychiatric was a gigantic meeting. There's only some major cities and their big conference centers that could hold the 25,000 people showing up for the meeting. Well, it's dwindled down and down and down and down. They're closer to 10,000 than 20,000 now. The only section of it that's been growing are the biological psychiatry.
Mm.
All
What
the
is
talk
that?
therapy pieces, they're all trimming down. The
Mm.
If it's evidence-based outcomes you're looking
Mhm.
for, the physical training of the brain activity ends up having solid evidence. It's got there's a rational basis for you find this finding, you can train this way and get a good outcome. And uh, um, Burbaumer's work showing that slow cortical potentials could control epilepsy, and Sturman's work showing that SMR could control epilepsy. And oh, by the way, it helps with motor dysregulation like tremors. So Parkinsonism can be helped with SMR training. There's there, there's huge additional clinical applications that have spun out. Alpha training. Well, what good was that for back in the beginning? Well, it was consciousness. It was like meditation. Well, alpha training is also done alpha theta with addiction. In 1972, when we started the lab, it was in the alcoholism drug division of the state hospital. So we had access to all the patients in the state hospital. Well, we had a lot of alcoholics. They're right there. And if you look at their EEG, alcoholics, not every one of them, but alcoholics as a general rule have a pattern that's predictive of their alcoholism. It's
Right.
a low voltage, fast EEG. They're
Mm.
over aroused. There's a genetic marker for it. It's gene number 4, and it controls GABA receptors. GABA is a calming neurochemistry,
Mhm.
calming, centering, stabilizing. And more GABA, more stable. Well, if you make more GABA receptors than you can saturate, you're over aroused.
Mm.
And a low voltage fast EEG has no alpha.
Right.
You close your eyes, we'll make alpha. You close the eyes, there's no alpha. Their brain is still bzzz, they're still buzzing along making beta and no alpha. Well, we trained the alcoholics to make alpha. The ones who we trained never came back.
That's
Now,
incredible.
a state hospital's recidivism rate isn't as good as a regular 12-step program recidivism rate, but a
Mm.
regular alcoholism treatment or drug addiction treatment program, they might get 30%, they might claim 50%, but they very seldom even meet 50%.
Oh,
Peniston got 70% success. We
okay.
did a study with 30 people. At the end of 1 year, all 30 were still clean and sober.
Because of
But
the
we,
relapses, right? Like they may quit for a little while, but if you follow them long enough, you see they may relapse
yeah,
because the alpha
and
is still lacking, right?
the problem is if you don't get rid of the reason that they're drinking, the
Oh,
drive,
exactly.
then they will return to the behavior because they're still driven. There's
Mm-hmm.
two kinds of drive.
Mm-hmm.
You have overarousal as a drive, or you have cingulate, obsessive compulsive as a drive. You have overarousal, that alpha theta training is perfect for you.
Mm-hmm.
You will learn how to wind down the nervous system, and you're making your own GABA. You don't have to take alcohol to make GABA. You don't have to take
Mm-hmm.
drugs to make GABA. You're winding yourself down because you learned how. You've grabbed your own control mechanism. Your voltage gated ion channels are now in your own control, and you can make the alpha now yourself. You don't rely on it. And if you have an anterior cingulate problem, if you stop drinking, you might be still obsessed about something else. Symptom substitution. I'm
Right.
going to be clean and sober no matter what. And I swear I will never touch that stuff. But there's internets, there's internet porn, there's gambling,
Yeah, there's all this.
I'm going to be addicted to something else.
Yeah.
1/3 of the addicted people have a cingulate issue.
Mm.
Peniston's alpha theta treats the stuff that's over arousal with alpha theta training posteriorly. The 1/3 that you treat with the anterior cingulate were the third that he couldn't treat. That's the 100% clean and sober we ended up with. We treated the alpha theta people with the back of the head because we
Mm-hmm.
looked at their EEG, not their addiction. Alpha theta is driven by the DSM diagnosis. You're addicted, so you get this therapy. The thing is, only some people need that therapy. The rest of them need something at the cingulate. And unless you actually look, are they a low voltage fast EEG? Alpha theta. Do they have fast alpha? Alpha theta. Do they have beta spindles? Alpha theta. They're just too fast. Low voltage, faster beta spindles. Now, if the problem is that the anterior cingulate is slow or alpha or beta, then you have to train up front. Alpha theta at the back of the head isn't going to work. If
Yeah.
they have overarousal, you might need to pre-treatment of SMR or suppressed
Mhm.
training or beta training. That's the Scott protocol, which replaced the Peniston protocol. And but we basically look at the EEG and set aside the story. As much empathy as we can muster, we listen to the story. You tell me the story about your addiction. You know, and everybody's got their story, and they have the right to tell their story. It's probably a good thing for them to tell their story.
Right.
But ultimately, once they're done with their story, we look at their EEG, and that tells us how to treat them.
Mm.
We muster up the empathy based on their story, and then we know where to treat them based on the EEG. And at that point, we have outcomes that are predictable.
Mhm.
Um, we see exactly what the problem is. We fix the problem. The behavior goes away. If you get rid of the drive, the behavior goes away. At least that's what they say in the textbook. And
Mhm.
when you actually get rid of the drive, that's how it actually works out.
So just to backtrack a little bit for some of the people that are brand new, never even heard of the stuff we're talking about. We're talking about EEGs as an electroencephalograph assessment of the brain, the electrical waves in the brain. There are certain waves in the brain. There's alpha wave, beta wave, delta wave for in sleep, and theta wave. And all of these different waves, they have different behaviors that go with them, let's say, right? And some people we may look at the EEG. That's what Jay is an expert, and he looks at the EEG. He can tell what's going on in your brain, and these are like squiggly lines. It's like reading music. So you can look at the EEG and say, okay, we need to improve a certain facet of your brain waves, maybe the amplitude or power or something. There's different protocols. We're talking about Peniston, alpha theta, SMR. So there's for different kinds of needs, right? Some people just want to be more focused, so maybe you train what alpha, no, not alpha, but SMR. Alpha, be more relaxed. People that maybe you need to train beta if you want to get stuff done, and you have low. Do you see people like that? They have like
Yes.
weak beta waves, and then they're not motivated, maybe something
In
like
fact,
that.
if you go back to the early days of Lubar with ADD, ADHD, you need to have
Mhm.
your attention tuned up a little bit. Lubar did frontal training with beta and CZ on the top of your head with SMR, sensory motor rhythm.
Mhm.
And the Othmers did beta at C3 and SMR at C4. They were side to side, not front to back.
Mhm.
And over the years, the Othmers reached out from C3 to FC and C4 to PZ, and then they started to do other sites as well. When they started, they didn't have 19 channels to work with. They started with a couple of channels on their amplifier, and they built up from there. And at this point, there's most of the major laboratories do a full CAP assessment. They look at how your brain is actually working. They compare that usually to the raw EEG if they're good.
Mhm.
They have a database that can give you how you compare it to normal, and that's useful for some things. But you know, if you're a unique outlier, like an elite athlete,
Mhm.
how normal is an elite athlete?
Not at all.
you know, uh, some things you aspire to the mean because it's better than where you are. If you're a D student, C looks pretty good,
Mhm.
but extreme athletes and elite athletes don't have the usual patterns, but their patterns are their patterns, and they need to optimize their patterns to be the best. But they're quite often not quote average or normal in that respect. They're a unique outlier.
Yes.
Uh,
For elite athletes, what do you recommend? Like the literature says a lot about doing SMR training. Like what else is there
I,
for high performance?
Step one: assess, look and see what's going on,
Yes.
and talk to the elite athlete about what their goals are. One of
Mm-hmm.
the big problems in elite athletes is sleep.
Mm-hmm.
The Australian Institute for Sports, which is like the U.S. Olympic Committee, only it's in Australia, and
Mm-hmm.
that they came and talked to me about the issue of sleep, and I suggested that SMR training is training the same thing as a sleep spindle. And a sleep spindle's, what's it? Something you set your ring on at night next to the bed? A sleep spindle? No, a sleep spindle's a brain rhythm
Mm-hmm.
that is a stabilizing rhythm that keeps you from waking up with every little sound. As you're starting to fall asleep, if there's a sound, you have a vertex sharp wave. It's a spot on the top of your head that makes a little pointy wave. And if you've got a good sleep spindle or SMR, then you continue to fall asleep. But if you don't have a good sleep spindle, that sound will wake you back up. So you go from stage awake to stage one and then back awake. Yeah, as soon as you hit stage two with a vertex wave, you go straight back awake. So you don't fall asleep into slow wave sleep. Now, as an athlete, you need your slow wave sleep because it's your growth hormone. That's how you recover from the wear and tear of the workout. Although micro tears your muscles got from the workout, which you're going to get if you do a good workout, they're repaired. in slow wave sleep. The brain's making growth hormone, and that's cellular level recovery and wear and tear taken care of. And then REM sleep is later in the night. That you have six 90-minute cycles at night. And the first part of the night, you get most of your slow wave sleep. The last part of your night, you get most of your REM sleep. REM sleep is what people usually think of as dreaming. And, you know, your dreaming is actually playing back memories from the day, and they're being long-term potentiated. The new connections that you just grew with your slow wave sleep, you're now playing back memories. You're long-term potentiating things you learned today. So if you're the elite athlete and your coach taught you 10 things today, tomorrow you might remember 2 or 3 if you don't sleep well. If you slept really well, you grew new connections, you recovered from the wear or tear of the workout. REM sleep happens, you remember all the things you learned from the day. They're potentiated, so they're long term with you. They're not something you're forgetting the next day. So, elite athletes that aren't sleeping are going to have trouble. They're going to break down at some point.
Yes.
Because they're not recovering. Now,
Recover.
if you're an elite athlete in Australia, you're going to have to travel somewhere to the other side of the world to probably compete. So if you're not sleeping well at home, you sure as hell are not going to sleep well on the road. Sleeping is an exercise you need to get good at. And to get good at, you need to learn how to fall asleep well and stay asleep well. And you need good sleep hygiene. Sleep hygiene, what's that, a shower before you go to bed? So no, it's when did you eat last? Did you wind down or did you work out right before you went to bed? What's the room like? Is there a flashing light outside your window that's lighting your room up with light? Do you have an alarm clock right next to you that's got a big dial on it that's putting light in your room?
Light, temperature, right?
Yeah, exactly. What's your sleep hygiene like? And you go to a sleep lab, they'll give you an entire sheet of things to pay attention to on your sleep hygiene. So it's not just the shower, but if you get good at sleeping, now you can be the elite athlete. If you're not sleeping well, your elite athletes are that top 0.3% or something. It's not the top 10%. I mean, that might be the people who made it into college ball or something, but an elite athlete isn't just a college athlete. They're the cream of the crop, the best of the best. And you don't get to be the best of the best unless you have to work. Everything works. Everything has to work. If you're not sleeping well, you can't be the elite athlete. If you're not working out well, if you don't have the right coaches, the right diet, and there's so many things that go into it. And
mindset, the mental hygiene, right? Because let's say you go to sleep, and you did everything right, your nutrition, your training, and everything, and you're going to bed at the right time. But if you're ruminating, right? Your default mode network is out of control. What's going to happen? Even if you're just reviewing, let's say you're a fighter and you're reviewing your matches and you're fighting right before you go to bed. That's a terrible time to do it. So it's like, what kind of thoughts, what kind of mental space am I in before I get into sleep? Because that is going to arouse, right? It's going to release stress hormones, cortisol, and things like that right before you go to sleep. So that, I think that's part of the mistake that athletes do, is to review physical activity right before they're going to go to sleep.
Yeah, the image of some match is enough to trigger the neurochemistry and physical chemistry, the cortisol release. PTSD doesn't require wartime to bring a gun into your room for you to be PTSD. You've got you've got everything you need in your head to be traumatized, and you have everything you need in your head in order to unwrap that and fix it.
Mhm.
It takes a little bit of training and some specialized knowledge to point the people at the right kind of training. But PTSD is something we worked really well with, and uh, it, it's not all wartime trauma. I mean, there's enough.
Marital trauma, it's childhood
Oh,
trauma, it's
yeah, look at the ACEs scores,
yeah.
the adverse childhood experiences. I mean, goodness, if you have more than 4 out of the 10 ACEs questions that you
Mhm.
answer positively, you have later life health consequences, heart attacks, blood pressure
Mhm.
problems, cancer incidents. And you think, well, come on, you know, how could they show that without millions and millions of data points? Well, they did millions and millions of data points. When they first came to the neuroscientist with a few thousand people, they said, hmm, that's really, really interesting. But to be able to say anything, you're going to need really big numbers. And they thought, well, isn't 1,000 really a big number? But they did tens of thousands, and there's so many people that have been scanned with the ACEs and had their later life consequences looked at. That it's an irrefutable data set. Uh,
I agree. Some people think it's not very sophisticated because it's a very simple a way to dirty and quick. I say way to assess trauma, but I think it's a start. So, you
yeah,
can be too critical of everything. And it's
yeah,
it's also a very old study, and there may be more sophisticated methods, but I think you start with that, and then if you have a little bit, then maybe you don't, that's not a concern if you just have 1 2 uh points in the score. But if you start to have 5 6 7 8, like I have 8. So it's a miracle. Like I did a talk at AAPB, well, I think it was last year, and that was one of the things that I mentioned, that having 8 ACEs score. There's a lot of people walking around, in community mental health with 8 9 10. So we're like competing to see who has more trauma, right? So trauma. And, and I'm like,
if
and then
they need more trauma, they can come visit you. You could give them a kick in the head. So,
yeah, so it's valuable because it points to where the problem is at. And sometimes you go through therapy, and it's never is assessed. Trauma is not assessed at all, right?
yeah,
And it's also stress. Like they don't know how to assess stress. I also did a talk at my community mental health to the therapists, right? How do we assess stress? There are stress measures that you can, start this conversation, because sometimes people think that they have, oh, I have this and this. They come with their pre-created diagnosis themselves, like I have anxiety. Like, what do you mean? Like, I have depression. Like well, let's see if you what you have, right? Let's not just assume like some label that maybe
yeah,
sometimes it's people like, oh, I'm ADHD. Like maybe you're not, maybe you need a little more focus. So I don't just buy into whatever they're saying,
yeah,
but let's really assess, and nothing like the EEG to do like really in-depth assessment of what's really going on, because it's not subjective, right? It's an objective measure. So with the EEG, looking at the assessment, what's going on in the brain, we go into a treatment called neurofeedback, is what we're talking about. Neurofeedback, what, training? I guess some people call it training, brain
yeah,
training. So brain training, you can train your brain, you can change. I like to explain, change your brain waves, change your life, right? Like just a simple way to explain. So there are all these brain waves being broadcast at all times, and we can actually alter them, change them, just like we can change our respiratory rate, our heart rate, like through maybe heart rate by biofeedback and things like that. So That's something that's available. A lot of people don't know this about this. I want to invite therapists, and I want to invite people to look into their brain waves and try neurofeedback as a medicine free way to maybe change something in their lives, right? Improve something in their lives. And it doesn't have to be a condition, right, Ray? You work with people that just want to enhance their lives. Like if they want to maybe meditate better or do sports better, like what other ways can neurofeedback help maybe a high achiever, like an executive, a CEO, or somebody, or a father,
Yeah,
or a mom.
yeah, and if you you don't want to make it sound lesser. The father and the mother are
The
uh,
best.
they're the top of the heap. If they're not working well, then the aces scores go up.
Right.
So and aces scores are important, but it takes one concerned, involved individual to turn somebody's life around that has a tough ACEs start,
Mm.
and that's also been shown. It takes a dramatic intervention to make a turnaround. But
Several types, right? Not just one thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
There's many
it,
levels, right? Like you're saying, to the
yeah,
human being. It's not like one intervention for 20 days or 40 days is gonna fix intergenerational trauma. You have to come at it from all the different angles, and you gotta do it for the rest of your life,
yeah.
basically, right? That's
And
it.
it's a good point. The intergenerational nature
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
trauma, the epigenetics, the they used to think, well, your genes are your genes, and that you got like the color of your hair and some things from your parents, but not your personality, and that that no, the trauma your parents suffered or passed along to you, and the
Mhm.
way that you respond to stress. Your body has changes in the stress response. How easily do you produce cortisol? What level of stress are you holding?
Mhm.
What's your basal level of stress? When you're relaxed, or you think you're relaxed, uh, you know, at what level of relaxation are you really achieving?
Mhm.
Are you getting to a deep level of relaxation, or are you just skimming the tips of the waves of relaxation? You know, our ability to communicate internal states is terrible. You know,
Yes.
love, let me count the ways. Well, if we could describe it well, we would just describe it. But these internal states are ineffable between
Mhm.
people. You
Right.
can feel it with somebody and know that you're speaking the same language on rare occasion, and you can have that connection and knowledge. But our words are really not. Our words confirm communication. Communication's at a deeper level than the words.
Oh, definitely. Yes, so I mean, I could just talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but we kind of reached like a lot longer than I thought here. It's like over an hour talking with you. It's been a great pleasure. Well, would you like to mention something about your event
Oh,
coming up? Right?
um, you know, uh, first of all, if it's not obvious that I'm not really well, you haven't been looking. I mean, look at this. I mean,
Mhm.
when was the last time you saw somebody wearing an eye patch because their eye was all funky?
Well, my
Um,
first ever podcast, and this the doctor was also wearing a patch, so it's like the
well,
first, the last.
so I'm not the first.
No, not the first. Won't be the last.
But
Maybe.
I had a brain tumor removed 34 years ago. It was
Yeah.
the size
Yeah.
of a golf ball. It was exactly in the middle of my head. If you would
Wow.
have shot in one ear, out the other, and between my eyes, it crisscrossed
Mhm.
right through the middle of the tumor,
It's a
and it
miracle.
it totally destroyed my pituitary. So I
Mm.
have no pituitary.
Wow.
no HPA axis. I'm missing a foundational piece of the puzzle of how people work. At
Mm,
the time of the surgery,
mm,
that they have to give you kind of what are your odds of like living. And if you're a female and you have no pituitary, you have an average life expectancy of 7 years.
mm,
If you're a male, 10.
mm,
Apparently females have much more complex hormones than males,
mm.
and it's a problem if you're not in control of them. So it's been 34 years for me, but in 2018, the patch they took my face off, took the tumor out, put my face back on.
Wow.
No, it's an HMO. They could have done something about the nose, but
Ah,
nothing extra. Um, but the patch to keep your
mm,
brain from just leaking out through your nose
mm,
finally popped in 2018. I was flying back from Australia, and
mm,
flying was never easy for me. My brain would swell,
mm,
and no control over body fluid pressures, and brain would swell up, and it was extraordinarily painful. But I would fly internationally to go do lectures, and I really enjoyed doing those. So
yes.
um, uh, in 2018, flying back from Australia, this terrible,
Mm.
terrible headache, and I hear
Oh.
and then there was no more headache. And I
Mm,
didn't think, I thought, well, maybe my ears popped or something, I didn't think too much about it. I was relieved. But I got home, and a few days later in the backyard, I bent down to pick something up, and it went just drip, 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 drip out my nose. Just
mm.
like somebody just turned on a faucet, it was dripping.
Oh.
And if you know anything about anything, you realize, oh shit, that's
Mm,
my own cerebrospinal fluid dripping out my nose. The
mm.
patch for my surgery failed. So I can catch the common cold. It could go straight into my brain. I have an open pathway to my brain. So
Mm,
I can't travel anymore. I
mhm,
can't fly anymore because you can't, if you go to altitude, air goes in your head. I mean, it's not a good thing.
mhm,
So they, since I can't travel, people come here.
mhm,
I have the town I'm in is 29,000 people. Who would ever go here? It's a
mhm,
little tiny, tiny, tiny town, and it doesn't really have any facility that's normal and normal meeting facility. So we just take over the yacht club, which
mm,
has a big room that they do all their banquets and stuff in. So we just take over. It sits 80 people real comfortably, and has a little stage in the front for. And so we just take over the yacht club for 3 days and
mhm,
cater in some meals, and it works out for a local meeting. The
mhm,
first one was just a workshop, but then they decided to do it again and again and again. So we've been doing it since 2018,
mm.
and actually the 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 event last year came up with a logo that you can see.
Yeah, that's cool. I saw that.
You can see the logo, kind of somebody's face you might recognize. So
Mm,
um, those coins will be handed out this year at the meeting. Since I don't travel anywhere anymore, I do silly things like make coins. But people come here, and we bring in international speakers and local speakers from the U.S. and around the world, and they pop in here for 3 days. We have as much fun as we can, and have good science and good fun.
yeah,
And
learn a lot.
it's it's my birthday party, and this
Mhm.
year I'll be 77. So
Seven.
we'll enjoy some birthday cake and whatnot at a meal on the last day with everybody.
Mhm,
But Isabella, who's an intractable epileptic patient who was
mhm,
effectively treated, um, she was a young girl, and she really loved tennis, and she was good at it when she was young, but then she started having intractable seizures. And if if you have a seizure in the middle of your tennis game, They allow you some personal time, like if you had to adjust your bra strap or something, go pee, whatever, personal time, personal adjustment time of some sort. So if she would have a seizure and could recover and be back on the court and finish the game, she could play that game, but she would end up not being able to finish quite a few because she was having seizures. But she really wanted to keep playing tennis. She was good. Um, she went from being told that they had to remove her right temporal lobe to save her life, and she was having a couple hundred seizures a day, to being seizure free and medication free. And
Mm.
she's not the first person that I've worked with intractable epilepsy. In fact, I think she was the third one in the series. But all of them are seizure free and medication free. Uh, uh, when you stop the discharges from happening in the brain, there's no more convulsive activity, and uh, when there's no more convulsions, there's no more need for medications. So the doctors who prescribe the medication don't want you to be on them if there's no reason. And if their EEG is clear and you're not having a convulsion and the EEG stays clear for a bit, they're going to take you off the meds. I don't manage medication. I train. I tell people what to train. Basically, it's been so many years. I'm old and I can't see people face to face anymore anyway. So uh, all my work is mentoring work and lectures and EEG reviews with therapists who want to train. But Isabella's going to be there.
Gonna
She's
be
coming in.
there?
Um,
Wow.
we weren't sure she was going.
Mhm.
She went from being intractable epileptic and as a teenager. Um, she was seizure free for a bit of time, and she applied to schools in the U.S. For a tennis scholarship.
Mm.
And you have to declare your medical conditions and stuff. And she got accepted at Baylor on a full ride tennis scholarship, and she graduated with honors a couple of years ago. Just graduated with her master's degree, and she's now a tennis professional playing in Europe
Wow.
and also in New Zealand. She's on the Billie Jean King. They have 5 tennis players that they can have representing New Zealand for the Billie Jean King tennis tournament, and she was picked as one of theirs to represent them. So her family moved. Her father's from New Zealand. They were in the U.S. for a while, in Barcelona for a while, Eastern Europe, New Zealand. She's back and forth from New Zealand to Europe on playing tennis. So we weren't sure she's going to be able to make it, but the dates worked out just right, and so she and her sister will be flying in to attend the meeting and
And
talk
event?
about her experience from her side of it. She did 350 sessions of training to stop her seizures entirely, but they stopped entirely. And she still does training. Now the training is to optimize her tennis game, not for stopping seizures. She doesn't have them anymore. So, and anyway, we're bringing over more than just her. Obviously, Silvana Markovska-Simoska from
Mhm.
Macedonia will be over. She was a student of Jordan Papjordanov, who taught me about quantum effects in the brain. He was the head of quantum physics for the Soviet Union when it was
No
the
way.
Soviet Union, but when they broke up, he was in Macedonia. But he passed only a few years ago now.
Wow.
She was his student, and I knew her
Mhm.
from that. But she's coming over. She's actually a fairly powerful person in Europe in neuroscience,
Incredible.
and uh, 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 fairly substantial figure within the Macedonian Academy of Science and Art. So anyway, we've got invited speakers and a lot of folks popping in for the meeting. And we we plan it to have as much fun as we can at the same time as we're having good science, and that combination usually brings people back. So um,
Yes.
it's also live streamed because we've got folks internationally that just can't make it, and flying into the US right now doesn't appeal to some folks, and I can understand that. It sometimes people aren't treated nicely at the border right now, so there's more interest internationally for live stream attendance. Although Santiago Braun says he's going to make it.
Okay. They need to have a visa.
Yeah, and he's going to be in Puerto Rico. So it's a domestic flight to San Francisco from
Oh,
Puerto Rico to San Francisco. It's not
that's
so
interesting.
he won't fly into international terminal or something. So
Okay.
uh,
Smart.
less of a hassle.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And the dates? It's set?
it's October 8th to the 11th. My
It's
birthday's the 12th, but that's a Sunday. It's a travel day, so we just
mm-hmm.
celebrated a day early.
Sweet.
So
Awesome. I
yeah,
hope we can make it. October, I have plenty of time to, and I'm in California, I'm in LA, so it's
well,
drives.
it's a short flight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Lee Steinberg is a sports agent.
Mm-hmm.
The movie Jerry Maguire,
Oh,
where Tom Cruise played him
mhm,
in the movie, he's going to be here
mhm,
for it, talking about traumatic brain injury. And uh, obviously, he's represented a lot of athletes, and CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and in
mm,
football, and all of that is a big concern. When you represent sports figures that go into sports, they're people you know the rest of your life, and if they come out injured on the other end, you end up realizing it. And so he's actually donated over $1 billion, B with a billion, for philanthropy, and primarily oriented towards a traumatic brain injury at this point.
yeah, that's
So,
fascinating. There's a lot that neurofeedback can do to reverse some of those
oh,
things.
yeah, 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 absolutely, and
Yeah,
that's why he's coming.
yeah.
So
I'm interested. I'm interested. I'm gonna make do what I can to come. I have a newborn, so not newborn anymore, 6 months old, but I'll see what I can do. I'll bring him over.
that's still pretty fresh. So yeah, it won't be the youngest one.
Mm.
Rebecca, who helps
Nice.
run things, is due to have her baby in another maybe 10 days.
Med Sync, isn't she? Isn't it? I
Yeah, so she's going to be very new
yeah,
in October.
that's
And she's wondering whether it was okay to bring. Is no, we're family. We'd be upset if you didn't come with a baby, So
that's
and
nice. It's good
you
to know.
know, it it, it it's more like family than a, a formal meeting in some respects, but we do make sure that the science is solid, and um, and uh, we just started to put the videos from 2 years ago online. Dirk de Ritter, Martijn Arns, their talks are world class talks, and well worth taking a look at them. And we're just putting those out, $50 a piece for any one of the talks. At any of the, you can get 3 days of recordings for $350, but if you want one specific talk, is
Mm.
$50 for the recording for that. From and it, those major talks, those are well worth the price of admission for that.
Yeah, that's one for you. I'm just amazed of all the contribution that you've made to the field and all your depth of knowledge, always sponsoring and like how do you say helping students right promote that are working in the field, sponsoring them with scholarships and things like that. The people they're doing a great job in Texas. Is that San Antonio,
Yeah, yeah,
Texas?
yeah. San Antonio, Mark
Mark Jones,
Jones.
Dr. Jones. Yeah.
Students just
Mhm.
downloaded the instructions on how to 3D print a headset for dry sensors,
And it
and
works.
they built it. They had it fabricated and they assembled it, and they're
Wow.
doing testing on it now. And as soon as I heard that they were doing that, you know, um, it, if you require somebody to apply for funds, first of all, there's a damn application you got to fill out. And then there's probably the professor, you got to get the professor to sign something or the university to sign something.
Mhm.
You just ran around and spent time and energy filling out an application for a couple $1,000s. And some of these want you to then write a damn report at the end of it. And you spent $4,000 of your time to do a $2,000 grant. So
That's
the,
fun.
those kinds of grants are not what you need when you're a student. What you need is an angel grant. An angel grant is, where the hell did that money come from? It fell in from heaven somewhere. That kind of grant is what you need. And when we heard the students were doing that, we sent $2,000 to Mark to give away to them.
Mm.
And he's given them $250 a piece for the 8 of them that were involved. You know, $250. What is that? I mean, for a student, it probably means something, but ultimately, it's, what am I, cheap? Why am I not giving them real money? It, over time, it's added up.
Mm.
I do silly things. I see the beard.
Mhm.
I shave it off once in a while by auctioning it, and
That's fun.
people will pay money to shave this thing. And you think, well, yeah, that's silly. Yeah, it's silly, but it's free money for the students. Over the years, $24,625 total for shaving this damn thing.
Wow.
The first time it was shaved, Cynthia Curson said, "I hate that thing. Don't ever grow it back." And I'm thinking, don't you understand operant principles? You just paid me for having a long beard.
Very
I'm gonna
rewarding.
grow, and I hate to shave, so I'm gonna grow that sucker back. And so
Mhm.
she's seen it far too many times. She would prefer never seeing it, but that it's okay. It'll be another few thousand. You know, and it and that's a little piece. We help out students with grants and uh, uh, opportunities to come to the meeting as well. So if you're a Saybrook student, we've had a difficulty with Saybrook as an institution. If we give them money to give to the students, they take 15%.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking, well, this is for your students. They're not for your instructors. It's not for your university. It's for your students. If you want to give this money to your students, you can give this money to your students. But they said that they can't do that. They have to take their percentage. And I
Or the
understand from
greatest
their
fee or
from
something.
their perspective that the university has to cover their overhead and everything as well. The government grants that they're cutting 15% out of is ruining universities. But
Mhm.
mine are just little tiny amounts, and we're not really trying to set up you know a, a foundation fund at the university. We're trying to give the money now to the students now, not hold it somehow and take interest payments and stuff. So we gave money to Saybrook one time, and we couldn't get a report back accurately as to what happened to the money. And they said that they take fees out, and we, so we don't give money to Saybrook because we can't make sure it gets to their students. But if there's a way to give money to Saybrook students, we would be making. I'm happy to help sponsor Saybrook students if
Mm.
there's a way to do that.
I know
But
some. I'm one of them.
yeah, well, we should chat because the, there's ways to get into the meeting for students.
Yeah, that's
There's the student fee that's published is just for the students who have got money.
Nice.
And which students are those?
It's well, this field is there's a large, very big barrier to entry. It's not like, you have to have all
Yeah,
this equipment and it costs a lot of money. Like for me to study it, like I don't want to rely on borrowing equipment from the teacher for us, and then returning it, and just you don't really know. And
yeah,
also sometimes we use very outdated equipment. I don't know if you know which equipment we're
yeah,
using. But I don't want to mention, but I want to have all the latest thing, the gadgets and everything, and then before you know, it's 30 grand. You have a
yeah,
piece of this and a piece of that, and then it becomes right with the latest and greatest equipment. So yeah, and not to mention all this the school tuition and all that.
yeah.
I'm gonna deal with that later. So yeah,
When
yeah.
when I was first coming into the field,
Hmm.
I didn't have any idea that the leading edge was really the bleeding edge. the
Yeah,
it's a painful amount of money that you spend when you're at the leading edge of something, because not
right.
everything you buy ends up panning out exactly how you intended, and things will change and grow.
Hmm.
And when you're first in, you're at an expensive end. The
Hmm.
first QEG machine I had to buy,
Hmm.
we had to get 4 for the lab. They were $160,000 each.
Wow.
Yeah,
And not
and
very, very
and
reliable, probably.
that they were the Spectrum 32, that they were built into a desk.
Wow.
Now you have the whole thing in something you can hold in your hand.
Nice.
Everything that was in that desk is
Mhm.
now in a little the amplifier that's no bigger than a small book, and it's better quality than anything that was in that original device. It was
Mhm.
built on a 386 computer with accelerator boards to get faster sampling rates and stuff. So
Mm.
it was a dinosaur, and it died the year 2000. It had a Y2K problem. The date of your date of birth to determine how old you are to get to the database was based on a two-digit year. Oops. So 2000 suddenly, you didn't have the ability to punch in your patient's date of birth and get an age that was proper. And so anyway, that it was it was getting to be kind of outdated by that point. Anyway, there were newer devices. The QSI in Canada came out at $60,000. That was a lot cheaper. I thought, oh, they're getting expensive now, and nowadays, you can find clinical quality amplifiers between
Mhm.
$5,000 and $10,000.
Yes, yes.
So, and then the software. I mean, that's the software ends up being expensive as well.
Yeah. And the
But
caps, and then the neurofeedback stuff all on top of
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun.
If
It's fun,
if
right?
I if I think of how much I've spent on
Uh-huh.
hardware, it's
Uh-huh.
millions. But if I think about how much I've spent having software developed,
Mhm. Mhm.
I've the way more than any amount of I've paid out for hardware is software development. So,
Yeah.
but I've had a whole series of companies over the years, and the they've all worked out in one way or another to
Yeah.
get me where I am now, able to
Nice.
sit home in with a nice blanket that was made for me by uh, Rhonda Osborne, who does quilting. This
Mhm.
is the back of the quilt, actually.
Oh, wow.
The other side is full of neurological little tiny pieces, all quilted up into fancy patterns. And
Uh-huh.
but I get to sit here half the time. The dog's on my lap. He's been on the floor most of the time here. But it's going through all of those various forms of business have gotten me to the point where my business operates without me doing anything at the business, and that operates independently. I look at EEGs with people online, and I do some talks on Zoom, not unlike what we're doing,
Mhm.
and yeah, so. but I stay happy. And at 77, I'm not well, but I'm happy. And I'd rather be happy than well in some respects. I mean, I've seen plenty of people that were well but never happy.
Yes. There's a lot of meaning, right? A lot of meaning built around your life and everything that you do. I think that it kind of seems to like keep you
You know,
busy, keep you right fulfilled.
I'm well known in the neuroscience world, but I'm actually more well known ultimately in the environmental world. I invented laser based pollution detection systems that are mandated for all the refineries in California.
Right.
Um, Community air monitoring is something we did, and we created some of the very first community air monitors. The bucket brigade, a 5 gallon bucket with a Kevlar bag in it, with a little fish pump and a battery and a switch on the top. You can collect air samples into a bag and send it to a
Mhm.
lab. And normally that's done by professionals, but communities, it's $50. You can make your own air sampler
Mm.
and have some money left over to go have lunch, probably.
Yeah.
So instead of waiting for the industry that made the release to come and sample your air, which, I mean, by the time they come, whatever stink they dumped on you is blown somewhere else. So
Right.
uh, uh, now you can catch the stink in your own bag in your own yard, if you want. And that bucket brigade went from the little town I used to live in here in the Bay Area. It's now worldwide. South Africa, Japan, they've used it to monitor industries that needed to be monitored. And when you actually have defensible scientific data showing what they're emitting, uh, 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 then you can get some action from them. So the very first laser pollution detection system was put together about 30 years ago now, and um, it was um, uh, it was basically a, a system I thought up. Um, we have a database of frequencies that are norms, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Well, we're shooting a laser beam. That's a frequency, and if you collect the beam, you can get a spectra of what frequencies have energy within the beam. And if you know chemistry, that spectra tells you what chemistry is in the beam. And if you have one infrared and one ultraviolet beam, you can catch all the stinky stuff and all the toxic stuff. So, because people are going to complain about the stink, but they really need to know about the toxic stuff that they can't smell too. So,
mhm.
and imagine a big laser, a meter diameter laser that shoots a kilometer long beam.
Wow.
Anything that breaks the beam, you catch it.
Mhm. I see.
Before that, they would build a shed on the fence line of the refinery, and they would have a hole on the fence in the shed. And if the air hit that hole, it would be sucked into a gas analyzer, and they would then detect it.
Mhm.
Well, they'd have to hit this little hole. I got a kilometer long beam that can catch it. So, who do you think catches more? And when I invented it, they didn't want it, but we forced them to build the first one. And about 20 years after the first one existed, and they told me at first, "What are you, crazy? You're using physics to detect chemistry? That's silly." I said, "Well, me being crazy aside, what about this laser thing? It does a really good job detecting all this chemistry." And they were into chemistry themselves and not physics, so they just blew it off. Well, 20 years later, which is now about a decade ago, they brought in EPA and all the universities in California and the Air Resources Board and two people from the public, me and Denny Larson. Denny's passed now. He was from the Community for a Better Environment, or Citizens for a Better Environment, and they changed their name at one point. But uh, uh, the system I designed all that years ago is now declared the best system you could design, and they're mandated throughout California, and they're being built elsewhere. In Texas, in the Ship Channel, monitoring Texas City, as I say, South Africa, Japan, they're all over. And so, having come up with that one, I think is probably equal to my contributions in the neuroscience world. It's just a different,
Mhm.
there's two sides of me, and one side does environmental, the other side does neuroscience, but they both look the same. It's a frequency, and if
Mhm.
you're shooting a beam and you see the spectra right now, you could subtract a clean air spectra that you shot when there wasn't anything in the beam, and you see what's left, what shouldn't be in the beam,
Mhm.
and so you can track, what dirty stuff are they emitting, and if you have a database of chemistry, you know what peaks mean, so you can tell them exactly what's in the beam. So it's not all that different. It's a frequency, it's a database, a comparison, a quantitative comparison, and spot what's wrong. So anyway, it's what I do in my spare time.
I
So,
see. You're like environmental hero on your free time. I got it.
um,
An
the, the
inventor and all that.
the the town that I lived in, uh, 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 um, I do environmental consulting, and
Mm.
the town I lived in had a power plant proposed for it. CNH Sugar, which is a sugar refinery, uh, and they needed power to refine the sugar. You need power, and instead of paying for it with their own power plant, making it with a big boiler, which is fairly inefficient. They wanted this power plant built next to them that would give them steam for their refinery and make electricity for the grid as cogeneration, which is a really good idea. It's just that they were putting it in the wrong spot.
Mm.
And in California, the Energy Commission gives people that want to build a power plant the ability to avoid local regulation in the city or county that they're building it in by going to the state, because local people don't want something, they pressure politicians. This is intended to allow them to build it. That's why they have the Energy Commission, not to stop it, but to allow it.
Mm.
And you have 1 year, guarantee 1 year, you'll get your decision. Send us your application. Within 1 year, you'll get your decision. That's a pretty good deal. I stopped this plant for 8.5 years. Finally, 3 times they had to withdraw the application. Finally, the head of Pacific Corp, which is like PG&E for the entire Pacific Northwest over to Montana down to Texas. PG&E is carved out of this gigantic territory. Pacific Corp has all the rest of that territory, and they're a $10 billion a year profit corporation.
Wow.
So they now own the right to build this cogeneration plant, and they came to town and met with me and said, "Why are you opposing this power plant?" And I said, "Well, it's in the wrong spot, and it's there's a lot of things that I would do differently." And he said, "Well, like what?" Well, the ammonia tank that you have right next to the railroad tracks. If a train derailed, it would break that tank, and you've got anhydrous ammonia in there. If the winds in the wintertime blow in this direction, you'd kill 1,000 people or more. So that should be buried underground
Mhm.
next to the railroad tracks, not just set next to the railroad tracks. All those cooling towers you have there, they're going to put steam plumes in the view. All these people are sitting on this community looking over the water, and you're going to put a steam plume in everybody's view. You're going to ruin the view for the entire town. I want you to build the world's largest air conditioner and cool the plant with a well-designed air conditioner instead of steam plumes with evaporative cooling. Nobody's ever done that. Doesn't mean it can't be done. you know Anyway, he sent the team of engineers down, met with me, wholly redesigned the plant. It went from 4 generators, 2 steam turbines, 2 gas turbines, and 4 generators. That's 4 turning shafts. Every shaft that turns is friction. Yeah. So at the end of it, it had 1 gas turbine, 1 steam turbine, and 1 generator and 1 shaft. And the size of it went way down. It moved from right across the street from Victorian homes that look right straight into the water. There's nothing between them and the water basically right now except the hillside. And they were going to have a 20-foot tall corrugated metal building blocking their view. Now, so we put everything much smaller and we moved it over to an industrial area. So it's not in anybody's view. It doesn't make steam plumes. The ammonia is not going to kill people. After 8.5 years, when they redesigned it, then I tried to get it built because cogeneration is a good idea. Half the town of 3,200 people, most of them, their families either worked at CNH or grew up working at CNH and now do something else. But it was a community, it was a company town basically. Half the town hated me for 8.5 years for getting in the way of this project. The other half of the town hated me for the last 1.5 years for getting it done. Now, I got $30 million for the town of 3,000 people, paid by the power company. Now, I think it turned out okay because all the people who hated me, whether they hated me for stopping it or making it happen, now are standing in line to get the money. We set up a charitable foundation for the town, and it has an elected board of directors. So the League of Women Voters comes in every 2 years and they do an election and you elect the board members to decide how to spend the money. And the money came in basically annually for 30 years. And at the end of it, it was 30 million totally donated. But imagine you're used to getting close to $1 million a year, crudely. And suddenly it stops. Oops. That's going to be tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when we set it up, as the money came in, 1/3 of the money that came in went into an endowment, which now has built itself up to being many millions of dollars, and the interest on it keeps the money flowing just like they're used to. You don't touch the money, you just get the interest off of it. So that we set it up so that the town wouldn't suddenly find, oops, there's no more money, And the lawyers who set it up for us, first of all, said, okay, who do you want to have as the appointed board of directors? They said, well, it'll be an elected board. No, nobody has done elected board. They advise against it. Why? Elections are tough. Well, if it's an appointed board, there's 5 people. Okay. When those 5 people have one of them quit, the 4 that are there are going to pick somebody else. Pretty soon it's going to be a little clique. It won't represent the town. It'll represent the people who were on the board historically. And
sounds like government.
Yeah. So we change the board periodically, and the League of Women Voters. You don't even have to be a registered voter if you can show you live in town. That's all you need. Yeah, and you get to vote. So anyway, they figure out how to spend the money, and they've done well with it. The town has freshened itself up very nicely. There were chain link fences that are now nice steel, powder coated, nice green fencing. And anyway, the community center redid the kitchen, and they redid air conditioning for the building, and they kept it as a craftsman building. It's an antique of a building, and if you modernized it, it would ruin it. So you had to redo it to the period, and wasn't inexpensive, but it was done very nicely. They put an actual bathroom in the park. So if you live in town, you can get a free key to the bathroom. If you don't live in town, there's a lock. At a certain time of night, it stops, so you can't. There's nobody living in it at night or anything. So, anyway, it's environmental stuff turned out very nicely for the little town. Cogeneration power plant. Soon after we finished that negotiation, the refinery next to the town dumped all the toxic waste on the town. I negotiated a settlement with them, including the building of the fence line monitoring system. It's about a $300 million negotiated settlement for their dumping 250 tons of toxic waste on the town.
Wow.
And but that was paid to people, not to the town.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I've done a lot of over $500 million in negotiated settlements between communities and industries, not litigation,
Mm-hmm.
negotiated settlements.
Yeah.
The lawyers take all the money on litigation. I have nothing against lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of a necessary evil in life, I guess. But you got to have them to draft up all the contracts and stuff. But at the same time, you don't want to end up paying them more than they need.
Yeah. Awesome, Jay. Thank you so much for
my apologies for going on and on.
No, you know what? We need to do this again. Maybe down the road, we invite you to talk again and come up with some more things to talk about.
Sure. If you pop in at the Sassoon Summit, we'll have plenty of things to talk about.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
You got it. Bye-bye.
Bye.